where the monies came from to fund the above budget of the 13,665,000,000. And as you see, federal funds are a very big piece. Normally they run around 30%. This year they went up to 31.5. Some of this was the CARES Act recovery funds that are coming in. We don't have all the American Recovery Act funds yet, and so we can't put them in the budget. We don't know the strings on them. We don't know all that details. But this is because something you may have heard of, FMAP, Federal Medicaid Assistance Percentage. It went up a little bit on several categories due to the CARES Act, bringing it to 31.5%. Then Education Trust Fund, again, is a big piece, 15.5%. Add that to the general fund of 25.3%. They're also a major part of this budget. Other funds, there's too many to mention, but this includes the tuition in the community colleges. It's fines and fees. In some cases, it's a lot of 200 separate different little things, including interest on the monies the treasurer holds and so on. Liquor fund, that's the profit from selling liquor in our state liquor stores, 1.1% of the budget. Highway fund is 3.6%, and fish and game fund is 0.2%. Turnpike is 2.5%, and that comes in separately, as does sweepstakes fund for a 0.2%. So those are the sources that help make up this $13 billion budget. Moving on to page 5, the operating budget of unrestricted revenue. Again, we're back to the general funds to show you where we collected them and what our major sources of funds are. Business profits tax being the biggest one at 27.8%. Next, in the business enterprise tax, we usually group those together when we're doing total revenue. That's only 2.7%, about 10% of the business profits tax. Liquor sales, 8.1%. Court fines and fees, 0.7%. Securities revenue, those are the registration fees for mutual funds that want to be sold in our state, have to pay a registration fee. That brings in 2.5% of the revenue, about 84 million. Insurance tax brings in 262 million, 7.7%. There's a tax on every insurance policy sold. Communications tax, that's on your phone bill. There's a couple of places. That brings in 77.6 million at 2.3%. The beer tax, it's pretty obvious where that comes from, 26 million. Medicaid recoveries, that's a complicated formula run through HHS, and we get about 6.2 million back from that. Real estate transfer tax at 7%. You'll hear about that on your county budgets. Tobacco tax brings in 8%. That had a pretty big year this last year. And then meals and rooms tax, another major one, 20% of the revenue that comes in. So I like these pie charts because they give you a pretty good idea of how all the different pieces fit together and where they all come from and where they all go out. So now I'm going to ask the division chairs to brief on the details of the adjustments they made in the sections of the budgets that were in their part of the budget. We'll start first with Chairman Lynn Ober of Division 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you can see from the Division 1 that's up there, we have made a number of changes. The first bullet point talks about $1.7 million of errors that were in the DAS budget. They were double budgeted for $600,000+ of maintenance to buildings. If you look at the third bullet point, cybersecurity was budgeted in error in their budget, which was another $600,000+. And if you look at the fourth bullet point, there was $517,000 that was double budgeted prematurely for the Law Enforcement Commission. Once we corrected all of those, we were able to restore the 20 positions that had been laid off because of the double budgeting. The last bullet point talks about the Lakeshore Redevelopment Planning Commission that has been working for a long time on the Lakeshore Region facility, which the state wishes to sell and which would save over $500,000 a year. In DOIT, we restored 4 positions that would provide support to
Working on
every
it.
agency.
He's
In DRA, we funded 2
working on another
additional
place.
audit
So
positions
trying to get
that
it.
will collect an additional $3 million in state revenue.
No, but there's a
And we
stream going on.
also
There's like 3
fully
people
fund
on that, and
the
there's one with
flood
70
control
people.
programs, which is $1.8 million.
Yeah.
This goes to our towns and cities. State Treasury distributes 152.6 million of meals and rooms revenues to our towns and cities. This was an increase of 15 million over the prior biennium for this statutory distribution. We reallocated $6 million of general fund to the Department of Corrections. Why? The governor had unfunded in his budget because of the pandemic, where we were expecting really low revenues, all of the vocational training and the academic training. In addition, we had the Treasury talk to DOE about using VLAX, our virtual learning academy for people who need to complete their high school diploma. Because of improvements in our prison system and the new women's prison, we will now be able to use that. We approved the governor's requested change to the statutory cap on the rainy day fund. The Office of Strategic Initiatives and the PUC have now become the Department of Energy. However, the planning piece was moved to the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, where it should have belonged anyway. We transferred the appropriation for business transport from the Department of Administrative Services to the judicial branch. And the reason we did that, it is the judicial branch that determines when prisoners are transferred and how much security they need in each courthouse. At the same time, the state law says that the money budgeted will be spent, and if more money is needed, then they prorate the amount given to the counties. We did not want to cut the county budgets. This will allow the branch that does the spending to allocate and watch the budget. We also provided the Supreme Court the authority to transfer funds within the judicial branch's budget as deemed necessary. This has worked well in the past. Such transfers in excess of $100,000 will require approval of the fiscal committee, just as they do for all agencies. We fully funded the Department of Military Affairs and Veteran Services, including new staff. We also provided that they will start to coordinate mental health programs and will collaborate with the VA. There are some new programs being proposed by the VA that would benefit veterans in our states. The Department of Agriculture and Markets and Food was also fully funded. And in addition, the House passed a bill creating a database for animal records for transferring money from certain funds. This budget makes the required appropriation for the maintenance of this database. In the Department of Justice, we recognize general fund savings of $278,000 by delaying the start of a new program and 2 new attorney positions. In many cases, the Department of Justice is not able to hire all new attorney positions at the beginning of the fiscal year, i.e. July 1st. This allows them time to create all of those job descriptions, get the paperwork done, and bring them on at the beginning of January. However, it does give us the savings. The banking department, also fully funded, asked that we change the charge for the public deposit investment pool because there was a conflict for the department's role in regulating state chartered entities and the commissioner's role in supporting the public deposit investment pool. We did support that. In the Liquor Commission, we amended the state liquor laws. I have to thank Representative Peter Leishman, who did a lot of work in this area. We're going to change the enforcement division from a quote unquote police division to a licensing and education division, which is what we intended them to be. The uniform positions will end on December 31st, 2021, and that provides 6 months for the officers to join other police entities while fully funding all the positions that have to be paid for paying accumulated leave and other termination costs. As mentioned, the Department of Energy was formed using OSI and the PUC. This proposes an energy department which combines not only the PUC and OSI, but also the consumer advocate, and has long been supported by the consumer advocate as the best way to go for the consumers in our state. Site evaluation committee work will be done by this agency. And the House Finance Amendment makes technical corrections to the proposed language and moves some position to the appropriate functional area. It also eliminates some positions. In the Department of Corrections, we restored the transitional housing programs at Shea Farm and Calumet House in Manchester. Traditional housing costs significantly less to operate than keeping a person in a prison bed. Without this resource, there is no way for our prisoners to transition back to normal living, make sure that they get a job, take care of themselves. This will reduce recidivism. It restores the transitional housing program coordinator position and the operating costs for the housing program at Shea Farm. It also restores the transitional housing programmer coordinator position and the operating costs for the housing program in Manchester. It transferred the staff back from the men's prison in Concord to the transitional housing or to Shea Farm. Restores funding to the department's educational vocational programs. These longstanding educational programs at the state prisons have reduced recidivism and contributed to a person's success upon release from prison. The goal is to help people become successful citizens and not to return to prison where it's very expensive to house them. It also provides the department, subject to the approval of the fiscal committee and the governor and the executive council, the ability to transfer funds between and among appropriations for salaries, overtime pay, holiday pay, part-time pay, and benefits. This language is critical because we frequently have a high staff vacant position count there. In the Department of Employment Security, Assistant Commissioner Labors asked us to add the Labor's Integrity Data Hub for the purpose of preventing and detecting fraud in the unemployment compensation, and we did that. Judicial Council budget was fully funded as presented, and it provides the language that in the event that expenditures for termination of parental rights are greater than what we expected, they also support indigent parents. It's hard to know 2 years in advance exactly how much funding they will need, so they can come to fiscal committee to get more funding. In the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, we increased the funding to the Small Business Development Center. They will now have $225,000 in each of the 2 years. The last year for which they spent money, they spent $160,000. So we funded them at more than they last spent. We did this by reducing $400,000 from the money, which was 17 million, that was budgeted for travel and tourism. In the Department of Environmental Services, we reluctantly suspended the state aid grants for the biennium. However, we think that the economy is going to be stronger than the revenue plan that was presented to the House by the House Ways and Means. So we added a section in House Bill 2 that will allow the DES commissioner to come to the fiscal committee every 6 months and request unrestricted revenue above the revenue plan and pay for these grants. It was our intention to show that the legislature supports these grants and supports payment of these grants. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Ober, and Division Two Chair, Representative Umberger will brief on Division Two changes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with the Department of Transportation. And this is based on the revenue estimates. We fully fund highway block grants. This is money that goes to cities and towns. And this was budgeted at 68.1 million over the biennium. And in recognition of the pandemic's impact on the road toll and vehicle fee revenue, the budget provides an additional $4 million in general fund appropriation to this program. Based on revenue estimates, again, we were able to fully fund the Highway and Bridge Betterment Program at $80.6 million over the biennium. This program is funded by 3 cents per gallon on road toll fees, and a portion of the SB 367 of 0.042 cents restricted toll, and is primarily used for paving on state highway systems, as well as bridge rehabilitation and other work to improve the conditions of the road system across the state. In recognition of the pandemic's impact on road toll revenues, the budget also provides an additional 5 million in general funds appropriation to this program. We also provide approximately 11.8 million over the biennium for maintenance and acquisition of fleet vehicles and equipment. This includes 6 million from the general fund. Approximately 66.6 million over the biennium was allocated to fund winter maintenance operations, and this includes an additional 4 million from the general funds. We also provide 13.6 million over the biennium for the state aid bridge program, which provides a state match for construction or reconstruction of municipally owned bridges. The Department of Education, again, the pandemic had an impact on enrollments, but it allows the DOE to make certain adjustments to the free and reduced meal eligible pupil counts for the purpose of calculating adequate education grants. This would provide approximately 16.7 million in FY22 and 17.5 million in 2023 of additional school aid to the districts above the estimates in the current law. Relative to the FY23 proposed $100 million reduction in the statewide property tax, or SWEP, it provides the necessary requirements to make the supplemental education payments in the event a municipality's education grant is negatively affected. This ensures that state aid would in no way be impacted by the SWEP reduction. In recognition of a 1-year lag between student counts and adequacy payments, it provides full funding to school districts that began full-day kindergarten programs in 2019 and 2020. Language included in HB2 would ensure school districts that began full-day kindergarten programs would receive full adequacy payments in the first year of the program. We also fully fund aid to the public charter schools based on enrollment estimates provided by DOE, totaling approximately 47 million in 2022 and 49 million in 2023. Also, over the biennium, we provide $1 million for lease aid to public charter schools, and also increase the maximum annual aid amount per school from 30,000 to 50,000. We provide 79.9 million for school building aid, which includes 52 million for payments on previously projected projects, 19 million for new school building aid projects, and 8 million to make accelerated payments on previously approved projects designed to pay down existing state obligations sooner. And this, of course, would allow new building aid projects in future budgets. We also provide 67.2 million over the biennium to fully fund the special education for higher cost students to aid school districts. This is 5.6 million over what the governor put in his budget. We provide 18 million over the biennium for career and technical education, tuition and transportation aid to school districts. And we provide 1.5 million over the biennium for the New Hampshire Robotics Education Development Program. In the lottery, HB2 authorizes historical horse racing, which is consistent with HB 626 as recommended by House Ways and Means, which is estimated to generate $18 million in additional education trust fund revenue over the biennium. For the community college and the university system of New Hampshire, we maintain separate governance and state support appropriations for the community college and the university system, while exploring a new commission to study and assess the potential for establishing a collaborative and strategic merging of the two systems. Also, we appropriated 1.5 million to the commission to carry out its work. We provided funding for the community college, 56 million per year, and the university system at 88.5 million per year, which is the same as the 2021 levels. We also moved the administration of the dual and concurrent enrollment program, better known as Running Start, from the Department of Education to the community college, and provide 1.5 million per year for the program. In the Department of Safety, we provide highway funds to, provide the Department of Highway funds, which is associated with collecting motor vehicle fees and road tolls at a level below the statutory limit, which is 26% of the highway fund. We established the body worn and dashboard camera fund with $1 million to provide matching grants to local law enforcement agencies to assist with the purchase, maintenance, and replacement equipment, as well as ongoing costs associated with data storage. This is in response to a recommendation of the New Hampshire Commission on Law Enforcement Accountability, Community, and Transparency, or probably better known by its acronym, LEAC. We also provided additional funding for the department's top 3 prioritized needs: 2 positions in the toxology lab and 1 position in the forensic lab. These positions will help meet demand and prevent delays and backlogs. In Fish and Game, by the way, which is healthier than it's been in years, we provided approximately 1.2 million in general funds over the biennium. And this money, 100,000 per year, is for non-game species, and 500,000 per year for to help with the enforcement. And the Fish and Game Fund is projected to have a surplus of over $6 million at the end of 2023. I'm not exactly sure how far back you'd have to go to find Fish and Game with a surplus. The Police Standards and Training Council We supported the governor's recommended funding levels, including 210,000 over the biennium for purposes of providing crisis intervention team training program. And again, this was a recommendation out of the LEAC committee. And finally, although not agency specific, we made no changes to the New Hampshire Excellence in Higher Education Endowment Trust Fund. However, it does authorize the New Hampshire College Tuition Savings Plan Advisory Council, which you may know as unique funding, to transfer funds between it and the governor's scholarship program, which as it deems appropriate. And also, we're forming a commission to develop recommendations to establish a single, neutral, and independent statewide entity to receive complaints alleging misconduct regarding all sworn and elected law enforcement officers. Again, this is in response to the LEAC Commission. And it also sets aside $100,000 to fund the proposed entity in 2023. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Division 3, let's stop there and note that Division 3 starts with a table. And the reason we start with a table is because this table tells a huge part of our overall story of what we've done in Division 3 this term. If you look to the left, you'll see the 2018 and 19 budget, where we ended at about $723 million. And then in the current budget that we're in, there was a massive, unsustainable, unrealistic growth rate of 17.4%. So one of the first strategic decisions that we took was, how do we get this unsustainable growth under control? And when you take a look at what we did in FY22 and 23, it's still growing at 3.7%. But we did bend the cost curve down considerably, dramatically. But for some of you who aren't happy with a 3.7% increase, let me just put that into perspective. We've had a large number of new clients enter into the health and social services arena of our state due to the pandemic. And so if you take a look at client increases throughout the system, you'll see that there's more demand for services. So the 3%, the 3.7%, I think, is a responsible provision of direct healthcare services to the residents of New Hampshire. So overall, the compound growth rate went up 4.9% per year. So if you go back to the previous budget, go through the current budget, and go to the end of the proposed budget, the growth rate overall on a compounded basis is 4.9%. I think that's still unsustainable, but it's a good start in just one budget. So on the next page, if we could scroll down to, yeah, there we go. Thank you. The first paragraph provides a lot of those same percentages we just went over using words, so I won't restate all that to you. The second bullet down, where it talks about incorporating a back of the budget reduction of 30 million, even after that 30 million, we still funded a growth rate of 3.7%. So what we've done, though, is we've set some very clear priorities on what parts of the department ought to come first. And we listed them, and you can read them there yourselves. They are direct service provision. So we exempt developmental services, including the acquired brain disorder services and children's income support services, the children's health insurance program, and county programs, to include the state share of funding for nursing homes. So we've set some real priorities on where this money and personnel ought to go. And for those who are concerned that we haven't given adequate guidance to the department, I would just want to point out that if you go through the briefing books that we've been provided, there's probably 100 federal and state laws that they have to comply with. DHHS is not suffering from a lack of guidance. And that's before you start to get to the regulations. So what this back of the budget cut does is it says to the leadership in the Department of Health and Human Services, we trust you. We think you're competent. We think you're leaders. We want you to go through and reprioritize using the growth and resources that we've given you so that we do the most care for the most number of our residents. You get to the next line. The next line down starts to talk about a second back of the budget cut. This is a reduction on paper. It's a paper reduction, otherwise known as a paper cut. And paper cuts, they don't hurt as much as they actually feel at the moment. But let's talk about some numbers that aren't on here. So if you're at home with a pen, I want you to write down that in FY19, the department was authorized 2,951 people. As of 11 March of this year, they had on staff 2,651. So that's really simple math. They were authorized 300 more people than they'd been able to hire. So we can start to see immediately that the reality of workforce shortages around the state, and combined with the pandemic, of course, and the governor's hiring freeze, has made it so that the department is understaffed to the tune of about 300 people based on the FY19 levels. So the governor had proposed raising that to 3,226. And it just seemed to me unrealistic because we still have a workforce shortage. So we reduced the maximum to 3,000. So that's 350 people that the department can still hire on a priority basis. That's 350 people. That represents 13% growth in the number of people working in the department. I'm telling you, if you go to any company in the United States and tell them that you're going to let them hire 13% more people, that's an absolutely unheard of level of growth. There is no cut. There is no cut. This is a 13% growth in the number of people. Okay, so next bullet down, and I can start moving from here because those are really the two big things, or three big things. So we recognize that the department is asking for just an absolutely enormous amount of money to replace their IT systems. And one of the reasons they need so much money is because they have a legacy system that dates back to the early 2000s, and it's just out of date. It's out of maintenance, and it's becoming a security threat. So they're going to have to run some systems in parallel for a couple of years in order to replace and modernize. So there's money for that. We received very late in the process a recommendation from Alvarez and Martinez to do some management changes that would result in some growth. The department had this for 2 weeks longer than what they were able to give it to us. So in the last week, we saw the recommendation. 4 of them jumped out as making a lot of sense because the payback period on those was over 3x the investment and payback in 2-year period. So that was smart. We deferred other parts of that study because it was, we just didn't have time to redo their work and take a look at it. So with the DCYF, the big decision is that we, in this budget, are forcing the closure of the Sununu Center in the second year of the budget. That's going to free up over $12 million a year. We asked the department to provide us with some recommendations on how we could cut the expenses. This facility was initially built for 144 people, and we have a census averaging between 10 and 16 with a recidivism rate of 60%. And so this is expensive and not effective. So we need to change what we're doing. And so one thing we did was we included in HB2 one of the House bills that came out of Children and Family Law, I think either unanimously or nearly unanimously, that would change the census even lower to perhaps half as many kids. And when asked, the department did not provide what their new expense rates would be on a much lower census. And so we're just going to have to try to force their hands to shut Sununu in the second year. Now, this was a moment of high bipartisanship in the committee. It was really kind of the highlight, I think, of our getting along and trying to do what's right for the community. So Division of Economic and Housing Stability there. There's some federal money called Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. And so we have some parents trying to go back to work, and there's a wait list for people who have employer-based problems with getting daycare. So this would authorize those wait lists to be reduced by using the federal TANF money. And I think that's good to get people back to work. So the next one down on Medicaid business and policy, we fully funded the governor's recommendations on the amount of money that we spend on managed care and fee-for-service and children's health insurance plans. So back to the personnel item for a moment. If you hear somebody saying that there's not enough people at DHHS, just remember that almost all the direct care gets contracted out. There's an enormous workforce that you don't see. It's those people providing care through contracts. And we are not cutting that at all. We're funding that at a very high level. Let's see, what else jumps out? I'm going to go down to elderly and adult services. This was a major policy move for us. The governor's budget came across. It showed that the amount of money that the counties would have to pay for the nursing homes was going to increase their spending year to year by about 18%. And when we asked Rockingham County and Hillsborough County to tell us the impact of that, Rockingham County said that without a doubt that would force them to raise the county share of their property taxes to 7%. Or up 7%. So in order to avoid a property tax increase, we ended up funding this aggressively to where there's only a 2% growth rate instead of the historic 3% that had been negotiated in other budgets. So this is one of those hidden property tax cuts that the legislature should claim credit for, but it's probably going to get lost in the noise. Just know that you're helping your taxpayers right there. Next one down that I think is important is it's fully funding the developmental services. It's fully funding the acquired brain disorder services. All of these are coming across at the governor's recommended levels. So no cuts. It funds the children in-home support services at the governor's recommended level too. So there's no cuts. Then when we get to the public health, the big issue here really came through in House Bill 2, where for years there's been a weak effort to make sure that our family planning money goes to counsel couples on family planning, and that there's meant to be a prohibition of using state family planning money for any abortion services. So while that provision has been in place, the pro-life community has pointed out that money is fungible. And once you start paying these centers, the money is going to help on the abortion side of the clinic as well. And this has been denied every time the argument comes up. And there's a claim that abortion doesn't receive a dime from the family planning money. Well, so what an amendment does is says that, okay, fine, we believe you. Let's just say that every family planning program must have a physical and financial separation from the abortion services. That way we know that you're right. And what we've heard instead is that it's absolutely impossible. We're gonna hurt poor and underprivileged women because we're gonna separate the family planning from the abortion center, and it just can't be done. Well, so which is it? We've heard two stories with equal passion. So which is it? And so I'm gonna skip on from there. There's more I could say, but because we're expecting that there may be a change in who's providing family planning services, we've put $50,000 in there to pay up to $10,000 bonuses for new awardees. So every clinic that's new and get to the family planning contract is eligible for up to $10,000. That'll help them with one-time expenses, or it just may be a bonus incentive to compete. Now, we've grown the family planning money. This is another thing you're going to hear, that we're cutting all these services. No. In FY19, we spent $596,000. This year, we're following the governor's recommended budget of $812,000. That's a 10% per year growth rate. So we are fully funding, we are aggressively funding, we are happily funding family planning programs. We love our families, we love our children, and we want to help these young families bring their families into existence and to raise them well. So that's how we've invested in this budget. On the state mental health system, we supported the recommendation to have some workforce enhancements to recruit and retain more workers, because they have such a high vacancy rate there. We've also removed from HB2 a paragraph that basically would have authorized a new 60-bed forensic mental health hospital to be built on the grounds of the Concord Hospital. And this hadn't gone to Public Works, it hadn't gone to Health and Human Services as a policy issue. So since it was such a big deal, and because it raised the bed count from 25 to 60 with no explanation, and it included some bonding in there that really is beyond the scope of what we should be doing with operating money, we pulled that out, and we're going to, on the 12th, have a integrated meeting where HHS and Public Works is going to come and listen, and we're going to spend the morning, trying to really understand what's been going on and the extent to which it's been coordinated with the Concord community. And in order to take care of our vets, we fully funded their expected census of residents, and then that concludes it. I guess in conclusion, this is a realistic budget. It's got real growth in it. It's got real priorities in it, and it really respects the fact that we have a great management team at DHHS that knows how to establish priorities and knows how to lead, because there's more than enough resources for them to get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Edwards. And now we're going to move on to the surplus statement. This is a little bit technical and complicated. So we're going to call on the genius of the legislative budget assistant, Mike Kane, to explain page 19 and subsequent. Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Representative. For the record, my name is Michael Kane. I'm the Legislative Budget Assistant. I'll just go through very quickly the purpose of a surplus statement for the General and Education Trust Fund, as well as the Highway and Fish and Game Fund, is to illustrate that the legislature's, be it the House or the Senate's budget, is balanced pursuant to RSA 98B. So right here in front of you, it's a combined general education trust fund. In 21, the governor and House Finance began with a negative balance forward from 20 of about $54.4 million. A majority of that due to the revenue loss in FY20 due to the pandemic. So a negative balance did carry forward into 21. Estimated revenues based on the latest estimates provided by House Ways and Means in March, I believe it was March 18th, as well as a revenue adjustment, which is a restricted revenue from the Education Trust Fund to fund the one-time fiscal capacity disparity aid and free and reduced lunch bump that was provided for in the last budget. So total revenues of about $2.78 billion in the House Finance estimates, working with Ways and Means. As far as budget appropriations, in total, approximately $2,721,727 in appropriations. That includes about $2,796 million in Section 1, which is the large portion of your state totals in House Bill 1, as well as appropriation adjustments, which are in the subsequent Schedule 2. Again, largest one being the offset of the revenue of the 62.5 above for the one-time education aid from the last biennium. That leaves a current year balance of about $66.47 million across both the General and Education Trust Fund, a cumulative ending balance of about $12.066 million. However, that is split between the Education Trust Fund, which has a positive $19,896 million balance. It is non-lapsing, but 21, based on the revenues, just based on today, it's assumed that there'll be a general fund shortfall of about $7.8 million. If revenues do come in under plan, there's an automatic or two triggers that need to be met in statute, or two instances, one being an operating budget deficit, the second being that revenues for the current biennium were below the planned revenues. And if that were to occur, that would require a draw on the rainy day fund of about $7.8 million. Again, a little too early to predict, just based on the estimates we have today and the appropriations, as well as the estimated lapse updated. We do believe, sitting here today, there could be a draw of about $7.8 million, but obviously the Senate Ways and Means Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee will continue to look at the performance of General and Education Trust Fund revenue in March and April as they develop their estimates for the next biennium. The balance forward into 22, that's all the Education Trust Fund as it is non-lapsing, of about 19.9 million rounded carried forward. Estimated revenues, including revenue adjustments from the tax changes proposed in the bill, which were briefly discussed in by the previous presenters, results in total revenues of about $2.749 billion in 22. Appropriations from both sources, including a lapse estimate of about $71 million based on the actions taken by the divisions, our appropriations about $2.7 billion for current year balance of $47.2 billion of that 67. And if you add the balance forward, the 22 current cumulative ending balance is $67.1 million. Being the middle of the biennium, any balance at the close of fiscal year 22 will carry forward into the following year. So you can see in the final column, the beginning balance in 23 of about $67.1 million. Estimated revenues, again, based on the House Ways and Means estimates provided for in March, is about $2.8 billion. Revenue adjustments are a reduction of those revenues of about $118 million across both funds, the largest being the reduction of $100 million in the statewide property tax. So total revenues in 23 estimated at about $2.682 billion. Budget appropriations about $2.830 billion in House Bill 1, and then positive adjustments of about $17.9 million. And that offsets appropriations. That includes the back of the budget adjustments that Representative Edwards had just discussed, including an estimated lapse in the second year of the biennium of about $98.2 million, brings the total appropriations for that fiscal year to about $2.71415 billion. Current year balance is a negative 32.2, largely due to the one-time reduction to the statewide property tax of $100 million. And then the cumulative ending balance is 34.934. That 34.934 is all general fund balance at the end of the biennium. Any excess general funds will be transferred to the rainy day fund. So that would result, right as we sit here today, based on this proposal, a transfer to the rainy day fund of about $34.9 million, bringing the balance up to $142.6 million for the biennium. And if we could scroll down to the next couple pages, I'll just show you really quick on the general. That was the total combined general and education trust fund. If you want to see the individual general fund versus the education trust fund, here's the general fund. If you look in the final column, you can see that cumulative ending balance of about $34.9 million, which is then transferred to the rainy day fund. And if you could scroll down, please. Thank you. These are the revenue estimates for the general fund, specifically based on those estimates provided by House Ways and Means. These are your base estimates. And then if we could scroll through the next couple of pages, you can keep going. There are two sections on Schedule 2. One are revenue adjustments as well as appropriation adjustments. So it goes into detail. Everything that was presented to you in the previous 45 minutes has been outlined and accounted for, so that all the adjustments are included. And if we move forward to Schedule 3, this is the Education Trust Fund. And if we look into 23, there is a current year balance in negative 92.38. And again, the reason for that is the one-time reduction in the statewide education property tax, which is offset by a general fund appropriation and transfer of about $65.4 million, which brings the balance of the Education Trust Fund to zero at the end of 23. And if we went through the next couple of schedules, we have the Education Trust Fund portion of revenue estimates, Governor versus House Finance. And if we scroll to the next Schedule 4, this is similar to your Schedule 2 for the general fund, or all the adjustments for the revenues and appropriations that are listed. And you can see the $100 million on row 11 kind of jumps out at you. And if we could go forward to the next item, this is the highway fund. It's on a smaller scale than the previous, but this is an illustration of the highway fund to show that it is balanced based on the House Finance proposal. You can see on row 34, about $27,000 is the so-called the gap basis. In cash on hand is on row 29. That's about 22.5 in cash on hand. 32 are your gap adjustments for the highway fund, which the comptroller and the agencies work on. And those are due to timing or any other revenues on how they fall within the fiscal year. But that row 34, you usually want to see a positive or a zero on that line after you account for gap adjustments. And if we move forward to the Fish and Game surplus statement, again, this is a document showing that the House Finance Plan and the Fish and Game Fund is also balanced with an ending balance of about $6.027 million at the end of 23 for the Fish and Game Fund. And the last schedule is, this is just a state aid schedule, something we'll be creating. We'll be creating this throughout the session to show what the actual state aid for 20 and 21, as well as the governor recommended House Finance, Senate, as well as the final pass on state aid on a summary level. And that's all I have for my presentation. I know that Kevin Ripple and Mickey are managing the Zoom call right now, Representative Weiler. And if the attendees, the House members, have a question they would like to ask, if they could raise their hand, and we could pull them over as a panelist. and so that the members of the committee can answer their questions. I can answer any technical question relative to the surplus statement. I think the members of the chairs, as you have just seen, will be able to answer a lot of the other questions you have specific to the budget. And so I'll end my presentation and turn it over to Representative Weiler, and Kevin's going to notify you of who has their hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Kane, and we're grateful for your staff members that stood by us in every division and every change and kept track of all these things so that we could finally total it all up and know what we did. So we're open now for any questions from the House members. Raise your hand and Mr. Kane will recognize you and bring you in.
It looks like the first person who had their hand up was Representative Stacy Marie Lawton, and she's a panelist and should be able to speak now.
Thank you.
My question is there anything in the budget for peer support funding?
I believe there is. Representative Edwards Peer Support Group, was that in HHS?
Yeah.
Are you saying peer, P-E-E-R?
Yeah, it would be in with the Department of Health and Human Services.
Honestly, in a $5.9 billion budget, I don't recall that line item. So I'd take an assist from Mr. Ripple if he can tell me that we had a peer support line item in there.
There is a peer support line item. Off the top of my head, I don't recall what it's budgeted at. But I can get that information and get back to you, Representative.
Yeah. So if you'll send me an email, I'll get a full answer for you.
All righty.
Thank you. Next question, please.
The next question, I believe, the next person with their hand up was Representative Michael Cahill.
Yes, thank you. My question is for Representative Ober about the liquor enforcement / education. Who will be doing the inspection of our thousands of alcohol serving institutions and the convenience stores selling cigarettes and that sort of thing?
As I said, Representative Peter Leishman worked on this extensively. There is still a great deal of staff in there to do inspections, licensing, and education. So we did not defund the entire group. We removed the ones who are acting as police officers, left the licensors in there.
I know that the department had been looking for more people to do inspections. Was that addressed?
The department did not ask for more staffing in the budget.
Thank you, Representative.
What we found, Representative Cahill, there was a 300-page audit that we all read on this specific division. And they were, with even that 21 people, they were doing less than half of the inspections they should have been doing. So they were doing other activities rather than what we assumed was the purpose of the inspection division. So that's why we made the change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And the next question, and I apologize in advance if I butcher anybody's name here, I think it's bound to happen, is Representative Jackie Grote.
Thank you. That was correct. This is a question regarding Division 3. I believe the modernizing of the IT infrastructure within the department. How much money?
Can you speak up, please, Representative?
Yes, is this better?
Not much.
No. I'll speak louder. Can you please tell me how much money is being provided for the funding to upgrade the IT infrastructure mentioned? I believe it was for Division 3 in the Department of Health and Human Services. How much funding is allocated to that?
The totality of the funding for IT services and support in Division 3 is spread out amongst many different lines. The biggest chunk was related to the Medicaid Management Information System replacement. And we moved that into HB2. And when we moved that, I believe it was on the order of $35 million over the 2 years. And Mr. Ripple, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. It could have been as high as 43 million, but it was a lot of money. And then the IT budget is bigger than that because they have personnel lines for IT, and they have also regular operating costs associated with running and licensing their IT services. So altogether, if all the different line items were aggregated, and I never saw it all aggregated in one place, if we were spending 60 to 65 million over the 2 years just for DHHS IT, I would say that would be kind of on the low range, and it could be as high as 75 million when all combined. Does that help?
Yes, I was interested in the Medicaid part of it, so you answered my question. I have another quick question. May I be allowed to ask it now?
It's up to the chairman, and it really is hard to hear you, by the way.
Okay, is this better?
The IT is present in every department across state government. And the employees are assigned to IT, although they might be permanently in all the different departments, so that IT can have a universal and common procedures that they all follow. There's also help desks and things like that, that some of the smaller agencies that don't have someone internally can call a help desk. And so all those funds are transferred in and around government. And so it's difficult to track them by that one department. I'm sure we have the total somewhere, but it's going to take a little homework to add it all up. And if you send a query to LBA, they can probably get that for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair, if I could receive all of the questions and then I'll coordinate them with LBA.
So it's to Jess Edwards.
Yeah,
What's
thank
the
you.
rest of your email?
I just want to make sure all the representatives get their full questions answered.
Thank you. Next.
Next is Representative Ken Snow.
Thank you. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I am interested in a bill, and I wish I could remember the name, that was passed last year in the last session. It was sort of the lead bill in a rather massive healthcare bill that we passed. The opening bill was, I believe it was 1359 or 69, something like that, which is a bill I sponsored. And it was about Medicaid in and out. This would affect Division 3. And it was to correct the 30-year-old problem that existed in the early 90s. This program under Medicaid was brought into play for individuals whose income was well above the income that qualified them for Medicaid, but they had such extensive medical problems that, for example, somebody that earned $10,000 a year and had dialysis on a regular basis, their costs, out-of-pocket costs, without any insurance, would have brought their income way down below. And what this bill allowed them to do is, if the spend down was reached, so the spend down brought them down to the federal poverty level of, at that time, it was $591 a month. They would then begin receiving Medicaid for the balance of the month to pay the additional costs. This was supposed to be brought into effect. It was that poverty level that it was brought down to was $591. Certainly the cost of living has increased significantly since the early 1990s, 30 years ago. And the intent of this bill was to bring it up to the current level so that individuals with these extensive medical expenses, once they reach the federal poverty level now, the balance of the expenses they ran that month would be covered by Medicaid. And up until then, they'd have to spend their own funds to meet, but they wouldn't have to go beyond, which brought them down to the level that qualified them for poverty. This is a long explanation. Does that make sense? Does anybody remember this bill? And why was this not, why were no funds included in this particular bill in order to bring this into being? Was it even considered?
So Representative Snow, it's so good to hear your voice. I hope you're doing well, sir.
I'm doing very well, and thank you.
I was on Ways and Means last term and not paying attention to all the HHS bills.
We missed you too.
But if it passed last term, then I'm confident that the department has factored in whatever eligibility requirements that law lays out, and that the governor's process of coming up with a proposed budget made sure that there were funds adequate to cover that new eligibility category. And in general, in all direct health care, we accepted the governor's budget. So without being able to be specific, I think we're probably okay. And if you'll send me an email, sir, I will work to find out
Right.
what I need to about the eligibility and get you a good answer.
I will. I should, just for further information, when I did check with the department and the personnel in the Medicaid, they did say that they understood it, they had a plan in place, but they did say that as far as they knew, there was nothing included in the budget to cover whatever additional costs there would be, which is, I don't remember the exact amount of what it was, but it's not significant. But their understanding was there was no money included in the budget to cover the additional costs for this, to bring these people back from a 30-year-old threshold to qualify for care. But I will be glad to send you a memo with that kind of information. And if you could do anything to expedite moving that along, it would be a big help. It's very important for people who have these chronic medical conditions. It's also a help for people with conditions like neurological conditions, mental health conditions, where they have ongoing expenses that are pretty extraordinary and they don't go away.
Now, Mr. Ripple, do you know any of the history on that?
I believe that Representative Snow is correct and that it's not funded in the budget. If that's the case, it also was not funded in the governor's recommended budget. But I would have to go back and check with the department on the history of it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next.
Next is Representative Timothy Horrigan.
Oh, can you hear me? I can. My question is, the governor's budget included a significant increase in the legislative branch's budget, which I think is a good idea, given I think we've been understaffed despite the great work you do, Mr. Ripple, and all the legislative staffers. I think we don't have enough staff or enough resources, but I was kind of surprised that he would be increasing the resources. So was that an operational increase, or is that just to pay for like the things like building new entrance, the LOB? And then also, I haven't heard anything about the issue since then. So what's happening to our budget?
Representative Horgan, the legislative budget by state law is handled by the Facilities Committee and not the Finance Committee.
All right. And do you have any input on what they're planning to do? Or?
I do not sit on the Facilities Committee, sir. I do not know.
Okay. I mean, I do not either. I mean, I try as best I can to keep track of what they're doing, but they don't publish a lot of information about what they're doing most of the time. So there's no comment on what that was all about, or whether will we be investing more, to your knowledge, in upgrading our. We had to do like I think about 13 years worth of change in a few months this year, which cost a lot of money. But okay, well that's, I guess that's the answer.
You're not coming through very clearly here.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to speak up. I've been able to hear the people who are coming in remotely with no problem, and I've been able to hear you, but you're sitting in the hall. So, okay. So I guess that's about the answer we're going to get, that nobody knows, and it's up to the Joint Facilities Committee.
I think if I were you, I would email the Facilities Committee chairman. I'm sure that's on the House website. And
well, it is, yeah.
inquire.
I mean, they don't they don't really post much information about what transpires at their meetings unless they're actually at the meeting. It's kind of hard to follow what they're doing, but that's okay. Well, thanks for the information then. So I wish, okay, thanks.
Next,
And there are no more hands up.
there's no more hands up.
That's correct.
Thank you all for your attention. Hope you will support this budget. We've worked hard with it with the able assistance of the legislative budget assistant. We think it's balanced. We think it'll fill the needs of the people of our state. And we'll be talking about it more on Wednesday. I thank you all for your attention.